Quick snapshot, everyone, on Arkansas State. Saturday's opponent, 3-9 last season under the direction of Butch Jones. Most of you know him from his days at Tennessee. And speaking of Tennessee, his quarterback, JT Shrout, if that name sounds familiar, he vied for the job at Tennessee, never really was the starting quarterback, but got playing time there. And most recently was the starting quarterback at Colorado. So Arkansas State here in the last few years has made a habit of having big school quarterbacks kind of finish up their careers. As last year's starter, James Blackman, who had a nice 14 TD to 3 interception ratio, had moved on from Florida State, where he was a longtime starting quarterback there, and finished up at Arkansas State. And so it's now JT Shrout, former Buff and Vol. They lost their top rusher, lost their top 2 receivers. And as you can imagine, at 3-9, wins over Grambling, Louisiana, and UMass, and everybody else with a pulse beat Arkansas State. And their one opponent last season that would be in the neighborhood of Oklahoma was Ohio State in Columbus. They lost by 33 in a game they could have lost by 33-53. It didn't really matter. So that's a quick deal on Arkansas State. Phil Steele note here that when Butch Jones arrived, they had 1 300-pound offensive lineman. Now they have 11. So if nothing else, he's trying to mold their bodies into FBS players. But this brings me to Jason and everyone. This is just the connection of the team that played this past Saturday. It has nothing to do with the team that played. It has more to do with making a connection here, because we saw a team in USC and we also saw Notre Dame, the 2 major schools that played this past Saturday. And we saw Notre Dame trounce Navy. We saw USC have a comfortable win against San Jose State. But I think while this game against Arkansas State should not be much of a contest getting into the third quarter, the thing that you don't want coming out of the opener is that the areas that were the big concern and the big disappointments last year to raise their ugly head and show that they have not been addressed and are not necessarily taken care of yet.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, Mark. And I think from a couple of years ago, Oklahoma had a scare against Tulane that they were really fortunate to even win the game when they were a very big favorite in that contest. So I think that's, when you look at these opening week games, I think probably, even speaking from a coaching perspective, I think you have an idea what you have an idea, but I think a lot of times it ends up being something completely different once the game actually starts. So I think you hit the nail on the head. And so athlete for athlete, Oklahoma is obviously a much more talented team than Arkansas State is. I mean, this is a team that's won 5 games in the last 2 years. So I think you certainly wouldn't expect this to be a game that's competitive into the third or fourth quarter. But, absolutely, I think it's an opportunity to focus on improving in the areas that you struggled with last year. I think even in fall camp, I think there was a couple of scrimmages where Oklahoma struggled with some communication in the back end. So I think one of the things you'll look for is, is there any bust or is there any big plays that Arkansas State's able to generate? And not a terrible offensive team from a year ago, averaged 25 points a game. So I think it's a team that could potentially challenge Oklahoma, right? I mean, and you mentioned JT Shrout, who wasn't super successful at Colorado, but still is very formidable from an FBS perspective. So from a group of 5 perspective, I should say. So yeah, no, I think you absolutely want to see that. And I think you also want to get you would love to get an idea of, what does your competition look like in a real game-like situation? Are you able to play, go 2-3 deep and really just see, is there a big drop off of what kids make plays? I'm reminded of an older quarterback from Oklahoma, Eric Moore, and he was kind of in the area where Oklahoma wasn't super competitive during those years. That was the end of the Gary Gibbs era and the Schnellenberger and John Blake era. But he was a kid that would always light it up in practice, was an excellent practice player. But, when the lights came on, when it was time to play, he wasn't anywhere near as good. So I think, to a certain degree, you want to understand on both sides of it, what kind of kids do you have that maybe not necessarily are great practice players, but are much better when the lights come on, and even vice versa if you have some of those. So, it's a good opportunity. I think, if you're Oklahoma, you would love to get a kid like Jackson Arnold in the game in the third quarter, right? Where the game is not completely in doubt, but far enough spread where you feel comfortable in getting him some real game reps, right? Because that's the challenge that this team is going to have at the quarterback position going into the SEC next year. Is you have the clear number one in Dylan Gabriel, and if he's not the number one, then either there's an injury or just something's gone wrong with the season at that point. And so, but you still want to be in the position where you want to get him some competitive game reps going into the SEC next year with Gabriel being gone and him, essentially being the guy. But not only that, just across the board, you want to see what that depth and play that, that calling card has been competitive depth all summer and all fall. And so I think you really want to see, okay, is that competitive depth the same? Do you see a significant drop off from, from your number one into when you get into your threes and fours? Like, what kind of drop off does that look like? And certainly you expect to see a certain amount, but I think that will allow this team some opportunities to, particularly on the defensive side, is what I look at, because when you look at this schedule early on, Mark, with Arkansas State, with SMU, with Tulsa, Cincinnati, Iowa State, maybe Cincinnati and Iowa State's a little bit different animal than the first three, right? But these first three, you should be able to do about whatever you want on the offensive side of the ball. Arkansas State gave up almost 32 points a year ago. Just looking at them, SMU was not a great defensive team. Tulsa was not a great defensive team. So you feel like that you have that opportunity offensively to kind of almost play at your own pace in terms of, looking at different combinations and solidify what those combinations look like come conference season. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, and I know SMU is breaking in a new quarterback. I don't know if they've announced, but I assume it will be Preston Stone as their starter this week. And so they provide a little bit of a better test for Oklahoma's defense coming in week 2. So yeah, I think that's what you want to see in game 1. You want to see your ability to have a sizable margin with allowing some of that depth and certainly some of the younger kids opportunities to present themselves.